Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Batty Gulch near Gardner, Montana. This area is a high wooded plateau that slopes up to the west, rising to over 7,500 feet in elevation. Batty Gulch has pine, fir, and spruce trees scattered across a broad slope with a steep brushy gully along the creek. Visibility is good in most places here, as the trees are far apart and the ground is covered with grass and sagebrush for the most part. Yellowstone National Park borders the gulch just a few hundred yards to the south. It is prime grizzly bear habitat that offers elk, white-tailed deer, and moose for prey. Other predators in this area include cougars, wolves, coyotes, bobcats, and black bears. Many of Montana's residents are frequent hunters, and accessing the border around Yellowstone National Park is a key place to find animals. Deer, moose, and elk leave the safety and security of the park and wander in search of mates or food across its boundaries and into adjoining hunting units. This allows hunters who are aware of the park boundaries the opportunity to harvest game animals and fill their freezers with delicious elk, moose, and deer meat. Wildlife agencies indicate that there are 2,100 grizzly bears in western Montana, with the majority of those bears living in or near Glacier National Park in the northwest portion of the state. This leaves around 1,000 grizzlies broadly distributed over the rest of the state. Population densities of grizzly bears here average 1 bear for every 25 square miles. This may not seem very high, but given the amount of room and resources grizzlies require for their existence, the bears are in a state of overpopulation in ecosystems that support them. Grizzlies in this area used to have an abundant source of fat and nutrients delivered to any body of water in their habitat. Seasonal salmon runs would provide valued nourishment to the entire ecosystem and help the bears grow fat for hibernation. In the late 1940s, the construction of dams, the presence of pollution, and overfishing caused seasonal salmon runs to stop altogether. Since the 1980s, salmon reintroduction efforts have been met with a limited amount of success, but may never be restored to their previous levels, which supported bear populations. The absence of salmon has forced bears to find alternate sources of calories, which they defend aggressively from any intruder. On Tuesday, September 26, 2023, a hunter whom we will call Nick was pursuing game in Batty Gulch. Game animals are plentiful here, and sign of their presence covers the landscape as they move to find food and mates. Nick was aware that grizzlies were in the area in which he was hunting. He continually searched for signs of bear activity, such as scat or torn-up stumps. He had no way of anticipating the frightening and dangerous events that would unfold on this fateful day. As Nick hiked along the relatively clear slope of the gulch, he kept his eyes up and scanned for the flick of an ear or the telltale yellow and white patch on their rumps. He eagerly hoped for a nice trophy animal with a big body to materialize before his eyes. They are like ghosts here and can appear and disappear seemingly at whim, and finding them is frequently a pleasant surprise. Just as Nick rounded a small rise in the slope of the gulch, a large brown mass appeared just a short distance away. At first glance, it appeared to be a stump from a long-dead tree, but then it moved. Right before Nick's eyes, the stump grew a large head, revealing the distinct profile of a grizzly bear. Its dish-shaped face and huge hump of muscle on its shoulders proved to be the most ominous signs of the one animal Nick did not want to run into during his hunt. As soon as the bear lifted its head, it looked right at Nick. The bear immediately began charging toward the hunter. Nick's heart sank as he knew this was no bluff charge. He could see a large mound of sticks and dirt scraped up behind the bear as it bore down on him. He knew he had to act quickly to keep himself from harm and possibly save his own life. Nick yelled at the bear and quickly raised his hunting rifle to his shoulder. He prepared for the worst and clicked off the safety. The bear was closing in on him from less than 50 yards, and he didn't have a lot of time to react. As he watched the bear flowing toward him, he could see its fur bounce with each bound and muscles ripple as they absorbed the energy of each stride. Its head was high and steady as its eyes fixed on Nick's face. By the time the bear closed to within 20 yards, Nick had decided to fire his hunting rifle. He tried to time the pull of the trigger of his hunting rifle with a gentle bouncing of the grizzly's head. Once the sights of his rifle and the bear's head lined up, he pulled the trigger. His body jerked as the rifle roared in reaction to the man's will. The bullet tore its path like a destructive affliction and smashed its way through the bear's skull. As soon as the energy of the bullet overwhelmed the protective structure of the bear's skull, Nick watched the bear's head drop toward the ground. The bear's body tumbled and then skidded to a stop only a few yards from Nick's feet. Nick knew that he had narrowly avoided being maimed by the bear, and that he had to get a hold of authorities to report the details of the incident. They would want to know the circumstances surrounding the bear's death, and would expect his cooperation to fully understand the contributing factors of this incident. The only scars Nick would take away from this run-in with the grizzly would be the nagging questions of alternate outcomes that would wake him up on restless nights. This grizzly was one of 3 bears killed by sportsmen while defending themselves in the outdoors in the month of September in Montana, 2023. This trend is one of the most alarming and concerning issues faced by states that make up grizzly territory. After a thorough investigation, authorities concluded that the portrayal of events presented by Nick was supported by the forensic evidence collected at the attack scene. They also confirmed that the bear was defending a food cache containing an animal it had stashed for consumption. The grizzly was merely acting in defense of a valued and needed resource for its survival, even though the outcome could easily have been profoundly harmful and damaging to Nick's life and health. The evidence showed that there were no cubs observed at the scene, nor was there evidence of them being in the area. There was no cub tracks or orphaned grizzly cubs located in subsequent weeks. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think bear spray may have changed the outcome of this attack? What more could Nick have done to avoid the conflict with this grizzly? Was this bear looking to make a meal out of Nick, or was it simply defending its food cache? What would you do if you were surprised by a charging grizzly in open country? I'll be glad to read your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. I enjoy seeing where our viewers are from, so I would like to invite you to post the flag of your nation, state, or province in the comments section of this video. Today's episode takes us to the small town of Island Park, Idaho. The geography of this area is rolling hills covered in dense stands of pine, fir, and spruce trees, split by undulating waves of grasses and sagebrush. The elevation here is over 7,000 feet, and the winters are extremely cold with frequent accumulations of snow. The summers are nearly always hot and dry, creating a season of feast and famine for all animals in the area. There are plenty of berry bushes here, and along any given body of water you will see dense pockets of willow. Yellowstone National Park is only a stone's throw away, so there's always a constant ebbing and flowing of moose, deer, and elk based on seasonal demand. The predators of this area are a murderer's row of deadly and cunning carnivores. Wolves, cougars, coyotes, and bobcats, along with black bears, are seen regularly, but the most dangerous of predators, the grizzlies, are much more elusive and stealthy than the others. Island Park is located near Henry's Fork, which is a tributary of the Snake River. It is a world-class fly fishing destination for the beautiful rainbow trout that populate the streams here. The Continental Divide is a few miles north of the town and divides the waters flowing west into the Columbia River system and the east flowing into the Mississippi River system. This very rugged and remote area is a hotbed of grizzly and human conflicts, which are beginning to come to a head. In the early morning hours of Thursday, September 23, 2021, 2 archery hunters, whom we will call Tom and Don, were pursuing elk near Stamp Meadows. The heavily timbered hills give way to broad meadows of grass, on which bull elk strut to put on a show to attract cows who are ready to breed. Elk are grazers, which means they eat grass, as opposed to being browsers like deer and moose. Browsers dine on the shoots, leaves, and stems of various bushes and trees. The growth of grasses in Stamp Meadows make it a prime habitat for elk during a time of year that is demanding for them. As Tom and Don stalked their way along the edge of the meadow, they kept a wary eye out for grizzly bear sign. Tracks are far too common in this area, so seeing them isn't necessarily proof of a grizzly being in the immediate area. Given the bear's tendency to travel many miles in a given day, once you see a track, even if it's fresh, it isn't always correct to assume the grizzly is still nearby. Other forms of evidence of grizzly bear activity, like seeing stumps torn apart or anthills that have been dug up along with the grizzly bear tracks nearby, are a harbinger that grizzlies regularly seek food in this area. When they find a reliable location for food, grizzlies are known to frequently return on a regular pattern in search of more. As the archery hunters paralleled the tree line, they unknowingly walked within several yards of a hungry and very territorial sow grizzly bear, who took defending her cubs from any perceived threat very seriously. Don was armed with a 10mm semi-automatic pistol, and Tom carried a primed can of bear spray for protection. As the hunters encroached on the sow's hiding spot, which was a thick stand of low-growing jack pines, she sprang upon the men in a lightning-quick ambush. The sow emerged from cover only a few yards from the hunters and quickly closed the short distance in what seemed like an instant. Even though both men were completely surprised by the ambush, the knowledge of being in grizzly bear territory had them mentally prepared to defend themselves. Don immediately reached his hand toward his pistol, while Tom wrapped his hands around his bear spray canister. By the time the sow had approached to within 10 yards, Don began firing his pistol. As he heard his partner's shots ring out, Tom flicked the safety cap from the top of his bear spray canister and let loose that hellish orange cloud of billowing burning. As the sow was impacted by the bullets of Don's pistol, she was likely momentarily confused by the presence of two targets. The fact that bear spray was correctly dispensed didn't help her cause, as the noxious cloud began to irritate her eyes and nose. Her lungs filled with the burning concoction, and her breathing was replaced with coughs and gagging. Had the temperatures been lower, the propellant qualities of the bear spray canister would likely have rendered the irritant non-functional and ineffective. Don's accuracy must have been lethal, because the bullets fired from his pistol took their toll on the sow. After having several 10mm sized holes punched through vital areas of her anatomy, the sow breathed her last and gave up her grizzly ghost. As the pistol shots stopped echoing through the valley, Don and Tom could see two grizzly bear cubs scampering through the brush. Now without their mother and sole protector, they did the only thing they knew to do, and bolted for cover. The cub's mother had taught them well in her brief time with them, but now, without her, their future would be bleak, if not unsustainable. Tom and Don knew that the events that had transpired would be analyzed, critiqued, and questioned by well-intending state and federal investigators. It was a good thing for the archery hunters that the terrain in this area was rolling as opposed to being steep. This allowed them to reach out to game wardens via their cell phones and request that they hear the details of the run-in with the sow and her cubs. Wardens from the Idaho Fish and Game arrived on the scene around 8:30 a.m., immediately followed by federal wardens. Tom and Don explained the details of the incident and made sure to pass on that the sow's two cubs were still out there. During their investigation of the archery hunters' claims pertaining to the attack, federal and state agencies clearly acknowledged that this grizzly sow was killed in self-defense. They also initiated a broad and comprehensive search for the orphaned cubs. The fact that the government wardens initiated a search is proof that the cubs must have been born this past spring. If they were from the prior spring, it would have been assumed that they may have been able to make it through the winter on their own, and likely too wary of humans to be easily caught. If they were found before a boar grizz found them, they could be safely captured and transported to the Island Park Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center. Orphaned grizzly cubs are raised in safe and secure enclosures at this facility and serve as a real-life example for visitors to learn about grizzlies. Although the search didn't find the cubs, the investigation found that Don and Tom did not violate any state or national laws. They were found to have acted solely in self-defense and were not charged with any crimes, nor were they cited for any violations. Tom and Don's grizzly attack is not the only incident in Stamp Meadows between grizzlies and humans in recent years. On July 9, 2021, a trail runner from Maryland was jogging when he ran into a sow and her cub. She knocked him to the ground and bit him several times before dashing back into the brush with her cub. The runner sought and received medical help from Madison Memorial Hospital in nearby Rexburg, Idaho. Later that same month, a man was mountain biking past Stamp Meadows. As he sped down the trail, a sow grizzly and her cub charged at him as he passed a clump of brush. Fortunately, he was going too fast for the bears to catch up with him, and he got away without an injury. As a follow-up to the previously mentioned confrontations, on the evening of September 1, 2023, two archery hunters were sneaking through the dense brush just west of Island Park Reservoir. Both of the bow hunters were armed with pistols and managed to pull them out before a giant grizzly boar could close the distance between them. They fired several shots into the massive mauler and introduced him to his angels before he could harm either of them. They called into the Fremont County Dispatch to file a report relaying the facts surrounding their altercation with the big and angry Grizz. Following the thorough investigation, the archery hunters were found to have acted in self-defense and were not charged with any infractions. If you remember a few episodes prior to this one, I mentioned that both of my teenage sons drew bull moose tags in the hunting unit that includes Island Park. I commented on how we'd seen no moose, bulls or cows, in over 3 weeks of hunting in 3 different months. We did, however, see a multitude of grizzly bear tracks, and even followed a grizzly bear from an uncomfortable distance of only 150 yards for over 20 minutes. I mention this because it is apparent through my own experiences in this area that not only are the grizzlies here aggressive toward people, but they're currently overburdening their habitat's carrying capacity. When a visitor can find grizzly bears roaming between 2 highways in broad daylight, the way my sons and I did, then they are clearly being mismanaged. This trend line can only lead to more attacks and deaths on both sides of each species. After reviewing the short list of incidents involving hostile grizzlies and human beings, it is clear that the aggressive grizzly bears near Island Park, Idaho, take exception to the presence of people being near their cubs, food caches, and their territory more than any other grizzly population in the world. What could possibly be making this population of grizzlies so defensive or offensive to human presence? After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think there is an environmental factor that causes grizzlies around Island Park to be more hostile toward the presence of humans? If salmon migrations were reestablished, would this reduce human and grizzly confrontations? Is the lack of management, including hunting seasons or hazing seasons, creating an untenable and dangerous situation around Island Park, Idaho? Would you consider it worth the risk to catch a giant rainbow trout in the Henry's Fork and possibly be attacked by a grizzly who didn't appreciate your penchant for fly fishing? I will enjoy reading and responding to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a familiar place on this channel and too close to home for me personally. We're discussing a grizzly attack which happened near Sautel Peak, just north of Island Park, Idaho. The Montana border is a stone's throw away, since it is the watershed on the next hill to the west. When you think of high country, pictures of this kind of area may come to mind, given its elevation is between 7,000 and 8,000 feet, depending on where you're located on the mountain. At the foot of Sautel Peak lies uninterrupted miles of pine, fir, and spruce tree forest, and through it winds the Henry's Fork of the Snake River and the world-class trout fly fishing it offers. Common animals here include moose, elk, and mule deer. The predators here include bobcat, black bear, coyotes, cougars, and wolves, but the ever-increasing grizzly bear population is what is the focus of our discussion today. About 15 miles east is the boundary of Yellowstone National Park, and given nothing but mountains and forest lay between here and there, it isn't difficult to imagine grizzlies wandering out of the park in search of food or their own territory to claim. In fact, the year of 2015 had been a bumper crop for bear complaints. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office had fielded numerous calls from concerned citizens reporting grizzly sightings throughout the summer. The Idaho Fish and Game had to work in conjunction with federal agents to put down a 25-year-old male grizzly who had been breaking into outbuildings around Island Park recently. They said that judging by his age and appearance, he was no longer able to forage for his typical fare. He was led into human areas by competition over prime areas and by starvation. By fall time, archery season rolls around and elk and deer hunters dust off their camouflage and bows to sneak through the woods to try to bag some meat for the winter. To be successful at archery hunting, you not only have to be stealthy, you also have to move silently, or at least quietly, if you want to stay undetected by wary prey animals, and even then it isn't guaranteed. The senses of hearing and smell of deer and elk have adeptly detected predators before they can present any danger to their lives for untold eons. The success of the species is proof of that theory. In the early morning hours of Monday, August 31st, 2015, 55-year-old Mike Adams was putting the sneak on some elk on the slopes of Sautel Peak. The prior days had brought a heavy rain, and the creek nearby was loudly babbling, drowning out any other noises. Mike was an avid bow hunter and lived in Idaho Falls, a few hours south along the freeway. In years when Labor Day falls toward the end of the first week of September, Idaho bow hunters can enjoy an opening day weekend without the holiday crowds, and this is exactly what Mike was doing. Given his relatively remote location, he likely had the entire mountain all to himself, minus whatever other archery hunters who may have been around. Now Mike was no greenhorn, nor was he unaware of the possibility of running into the area's grizzly bears. He was left-handed, so he placed his bear spray holster on his left hip and his .44 Magnum pistol on his right one. As he quietly slipped through the shadows of the dark timber, there is no way Mike could have known that he was getting danger close to a deer carcass that a hungry mama grizzly had cached and was now protecting with every bit of the power and fury her species is known for. A sudden snap drew Mike's attention away from scanning the timber for the elk he was trailing. As he swung his head in the direction of the snap, his vision was filled with the terrifying sight of a massive sow grizzly closing in on him from his left and only a few yards away. His heart sank in his chest even further when he saw her 3 cubs trailing not far behind. Before Mike had so much as let out a grunt, the sow had latched her powerful jaws onto his left forearm. The impact of her attack had knocked him around, and he couldn't reach his bear spray across his body with his free right hand. The only thing he could do was reach for his pistol. As the angry sow jostled Mike around and tore into his flesh on his forearm, he attempted to pull his pistol from his hip holster. He could feel the immense pressure of her jaws on his bones, and her 2-inch teeth painfully tore nickel-sized holes through his flesh. Each time she bit, she pulled him toward her and tossed her head, which took him off balance. Then she would bite into his forearm in a different place. Each time he grabbed for his pistol, she would jerk him around, making his attempts at gripping his pistol impossible. After several seconds, Mike was able to grasp the pistol grip of his .44 Magnum, and from point-blank range fired off several shots in quick succession. The sow and her cubs scampered through the brush in a scattered retreat, frightened away by the repeated roar of the pistol. For a few seconds after watching the sow and her cubs flee, Mike was stunned and tried to collect himself. He was certain at least a few of his rounds had hit the sow, especially given she was biting on his other arm. His forearm was bleeding and painful, but the bear only managed to bite him there, though she had done so several times. She had missed swatting him with her paws, otherwise his injuries would have been much more severe, if not fatal. Mike was by himself when he set out, and knew there was no one nearby to call on for help. He did have one possible way to reach out, though, and he used his right hand to retrieve his cell phone from his pocket. Mike pressed the button on it and checked the service bars to see if he would get enough reception to complete a call to 911, and then dialed. The emergency response system had recently included a remarkable update to its services. They used his cell signal to pinpoint his location on a map and guided him through several miles of the Caribou-Targhee National Forest on a direct path to an ambulance at a nearby road. The waiting medics got to work bandaging Mike's wounds to slow the bleeding and loaded him aboard. They sped toward the Madison Memorial Hospital in Rexburg, Idaho, about 50 miles to the south as the crow flies. Once Mike arrived there, the staff cleaned his wounds and wheeled him into the X-ray station, where they examined the bones of his forearm. Fortunately for Mike, none of his arm bones were broken, and his wounds were closed with sutures and bandaged. Mike's wounds were noted to be several bites on his left forearm and tears in some of the muscle and skin from the sow tossing her head after she bit him. His left hand was also chewed up pretty good, but after receiving treatment, Mike was released to heal at home. Following Mike's attack, investigators made the trip to the GPS location of his attack. They really needed to know if they had a wounded grizzly on their hands, and would have to dispatch her, and possibly her cubs, if they determined she had been wounded. Upon arriving at the attack site, they found Mike's hat that had been shaken from his head during the attack. They also found the cached deer carcass and the sow's tracks as she attacked Mike. The area was scoured for 6 hours while they searched for any evidence that the bullets fired from Mike's .44 Magnum had struck the sow or one of her cubs. The size of the pistol would make a hell of a wound, so there should be fur and blood spatter on the ground, but they found none. After determining Mike's shots had somehow missed striking the grizzly entirely, they determined she was likely not wounded. Given her attack was centered around defending a cached deer carcass, as well as protecting her 3 cubs, they deemed her attack a defensive one.
They decided to take no action against the sow, given her actions or reactions were expected grizzly bear behavior given the circumstances. Mike eventually made a full recovery, but I could find no source indicating if he had ever returned to archery hunting. He was not charged with any violation resulting from the investigation of his attack. The 19,000 square mile area around Yellowstone National Park is said to host 757 grizzly bears, which are still listed as endangered. Many residents and some scientists state that the area is above maximum carrying capacity for grizzly bears, and that they are now spreading into areas of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming that they've not been for decades. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. How do you think it's possible that Mike missed the bear with every single shot he fired from point-blank range? Do you think you would stand a chance of hitting the grizzly while shooting from that range? Is archery hunting in grizzly territory a risk you'd be willing to take? As prepared as Mike was for a run-in with a bear, what more could he have done to prevent or avoid it? The next time you're sneaking through the woods and you hear a twig snap, will the story of Mike's grizzly bear attack come back to your mind? I'll be glad to read your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Smoky Range trailhead, which is accessible off of Canyon Creek Road. This location is in the Flathead National Forest in northwestern Montana, which is a hotbed for grizzly bear attacks. The geography here is forested mountains which start at a high elevation, then climb to just under 7,200 feet at the top of Sautel Peak. The trees here consist mostly of pine, fir, and spruce, but in the valleys pockets of willow and buckbrush offer shade and shelter to animals. Berry bushes and other bushy plants create a hedge-like barrier for anyone trying to see through them in certain areas. Elk, moose, and white-tailed deer are common sights and are an attractive source of food for human hunters as well as animals who predate upon them. The dominant predators here include cougars, wolves, coyotes, bobcats, as well as black bears and grizzly bears. The small mountain town of Whitefish is under 10 miles from the Smoky Range trailhead as the crow flies. This is close proximity to a grizzly bear that can cover that distance on a single afternoon while searching for food. Late summer is an interesting time for grizzly bears in this area. Summer's heat has stressed plants that the bears feed upon, and most berry seasons are in the last weeks of their yields. Food is getting harder to come by for bears, and the added stress of heat and dry conditions force them into cover and shade they would otherwise not search out during cooler, wetter times of the year. This stressor weighs heavier on younger and older bear populations, but particularly hard on sows with growing cubs. Not only do sows need to find enough food for their own survival during hibernation, they must also find enough to ensure the survival of the next generation of grizzly bears. On the afternoon of August 26, 2023, 2 archery hunters were scouting the Smoky Range trailhead area ahead of their elk hunting trip. For privacy's sake, we'll refer to these hunters as Tim and Rick. Their hunting trip was likely planned during the elk rut, which occurs around the middle of each September. During this time, bull elk are vying for control of harems of cows. The winning bull will be more likely to breed the cows and pass on the strongest genes to the next generation of elk. While competing, bull elk sound a loud, high-pitched scream called a bugle, which echoes for miles through valleys. This is done to locate each other and attract more cows for breeding purposes. This vociferous method of communicating is used by hunters as well as predators to find the location of elk herds. Temperatures on this afternoon peaked at 83 degrees Fahrenheit, which is mild for this time of year. By mid-afternoon, moderate breezes had been blowing through the trees, causing any scent on them to be carried to or away from wary noses monitoring them. Tim and Rick had been scouting the area since early morning and were approaching a thick stand of vegetation. They planned to simply bushwhack their way through it and emerge at another spot with a better view from which to glass for elk. Unbeknownst to the hunters, a sow grizzly and her cub had taken up shelter amongst the cover there, likely dozing off while waiting out the heat of the day. As Tim pushed his way through the tangled brush, he encroached on a very deadly and dangerous boundary. The sow, hidden by the bushes as she and her cub lay in the shade, likely heard them once they were only a few yards from her. Eons of protective survival instinct triggered her to investigate such a close intrusion of her and her cub's location. Rick and Tim were only 15 feet from the sow grizzly by the time she made herself known to the hunters. She stormed from her resting place in what must have been a very terrifying surprise to the hunters. The men were only a few yards apart from one another, and Tim was slightly behind Rick when they realized the sow was already upon them. The hunters had undoubtedly considered a close proximity encounter with a grizzly, as they were armed on their scouting trip. The sources I could find did not indicate anything about the firearms they carried, but it is assumed that they carried pistols, as rifles would have been nearly useless in self-defense against a grizzly in brush at close range. No source I could find indicated that they had packed bear spray with them on their trip. As the angry sow quickly advanced toward the hunters, both of them drew their firearms and began to send hot lead her way. During the confusion and speed of the attack, the sow was struck by several rounds from each man. As Tim fired from behind and off to Rick's side, one of his bullets tore through his partner's shoulder. After the gunshots thundered and the sow fell, the grim tally was one dead grizzly bear and one wounded hunter. Rick's wounds were not lethal, but were serious. The bullet fired by his partner entered through the rear of his shoulder, rendering his arm limited in its use. During the raucous shooting, the cub had disappeared, and likely sought refuge up a nearby tree or in a clump of brush. Tim and Rick immediately examined the wound in Rick's shoulder and tried to stop the bleeding as much as possible. They made their way out to their vehicle and got Rick to medical help for treatment of the wound. After being notified of the incident, the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks wardens began investigating the incident immediately. The sow's carcass was taken for analysis to gather information and confirm the hunter's account of the run-in with the sow and her cub. The grizzly killed during the attack was determined to be a 25-year-old female, which is very old for a sow with cubs. She had no history of conflict with people before this incident and was tagged in 2009 as part of a population survey on grizzlies in the area. Officials immediately began monitoring the location in search of the cub, but I could find no source pertaining to the failure or success of finding it. Depending on its age, the cub may have survived on its own. If it was a cub from the prior spring, it would likely die due to starvation or predation by a boar grizzly bear. After the investigation by the FWP's Wildlife Human Attack Response Team, the sow's behavior was deemed defensive due to the presence of her cub and the lack of conflict with people. Had she not been killed during the attack, she likely would have been left alone, even if she had mauled the hunters, due to the circumstances involved in the attack. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think this attack could have been avoided had the hunters found a route with better visibility? How did the hunters get so close to the grizzly and her cub without being detected? Would bear spray have prevented this attack? Do you think the cub found a way to survive? I hope so. I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Henry's Lake, Idaho, just 20 miles from the western border of Yellowstone National Park. The terrain here are high mountains interrupted by grassy meadows, with elevations between 6,500 and 8,000 feet high. The tall forests here are a combination of pine, fir, and spruce trees, mingled with stands of quaking aspen. Wild berries like serviceberry, thimbleberry, huckleberry, and golden currant fill in a dense undergrowth and provide shelter and food for animals and humans alike. The winters here are cold and snowy, with an average temperature of well below freezing, even during the daytime. Each month of winter averages about 3 inches of snowfall, which can add up to a foot or more near the end of the season. Given its proximity to Yellowstone National Park, you can expect to see moose, mule deer, elk, and pronghorn antelope browsing the meadow edges. The predators of this area include cougars, wolves, coyotes, black bears, and an increasing and spreading population of grizzly bears. Fall is a busy time for people in this area. Locals and visitors pack the mountains in search of game, beginning in late August with archery hunters, then rifle hunters at the beginning of October. Recreation is a key economic driver for communities here, as hunting, fishing, snowmobiling, and hiking draw visitors from around the world to this area. Fall is also a busy time for bears. Black bears and grizzlies are in hyperphagia, which is a metabolic state that increases their drive to find food. Bears will cover miles and miles each day looking for extra calories that will build their fat reserves needed for hibernation and may cause them to deviate from predictable patterns to do so. Just northwest of Henry's Lake is a small cluster of mountains called the Henry's Lake or Lion's Head Mountains, which are part of the Caribou-Targhee National Forest. There are many roads between this area and the national park, which conservationists say limit wildlife travel between ecosystems, but apparently grizzlies didn't get the memo. On the evening of September 30th, 2023, 2 elk hunters were sneaking through the timber in search of the elusive and secretive ungulates. For the sake of this episode, we'll refer to them as Mike and Steve, as their actual identities have not been released to the public. Mike and Steve have formulated a plan to stalk a stand of dark timber and determine the route each of them would plan to travel. They would make sure to be near each other, but far enough apart that elk would find it more difficult to circle around them in the timber. Elk that detect a human scent on the breeze will frequently tiptoe around them while using the breeze to their advantage, and can do this making very little detectable noise. I've had this happen to me many times while stalking elk in central Idaho. As Steve and Mike split up, they carried their hunting equipment as well as a sidearm, but did not pack bear spray. Mike headed along his planned route, and Steve was a little further around the hill and traveling a route that roughly paralleled Mike's. The plan was to meet up at the end of the stalk, or back at camp, to discuss the information gathered during the stalk, if neither man was successful at getting a shot or harvesting an elk. As Steve sneaked through the shadows of the dark timber, he scanned each bush and tree for telltale signs of elk. An outline of an ear, or the white fur on their rump, are sometimes all the evidence the animals will provide, as they secret themselves among the bushes. Knowing the habits of game animals is the key to successfully harvesting them. The hunters knew that in the evening the elk would be headed downhill to a water source to fill up after sleeping the day away in shaded beds higher on the mountains. While searching for a sign of elk in the area, Steve examined the trails for tracks and wallows for recent proof of their activity. He decided to continue on his route to the dark timber on the north side of the slope and began working his way toward that location. The brush on the northern slope of most mountains and hills here is more dense than on southern exposures due to longer-lasting accumulations of precipitation. Steve pushed his way through tangles of brush and over deadfall logs while keeping his eyes scanning for scant detail. As Steve crept along, a rustling in the bushes a short distance away caught his attention. He was probably hoping a nice-sized bull elk would emerge and present a broadside shot. But what blurred from the cover was a large sow grizzly, and she wasn't happy to find a human being so close to her, so unexpectedly. Now a little bit about grizzlies and their speed is in order to understand Steve's predicament. They can sprint at over 40 miles an hour, which translates into 44 feet per second. This distance is roughly equal to 15 yards, which means the sow emerging at only 100 feet would be upon Steve in about 2.5 seconds. That isn't much time to consider whether her charge is a bluff or a full-on attack. As soon as Steve's mind could process the bear's presence, he yelled out to Mike to make sure he knew the grizzly was close. That was all it took for the sow to initiate her attack on him. She began advancing toward him, as his hand was already reaching toward his pistol in its holster. The sources I could find regarding this incident did not indicate what caliber, make, or model of firearm Steve was carrying. I would only assume, by the outcome, that it had to be at least a .40 caliber, as a smaller firearm probably would have only injured the grizzly, increasing her aggression and not stopping her. Steve could see the grizzly stretching out her paws with each bound, bringing her dangerously close to him with each one. In a split second, he unholstered his pistol and let fly several shots, each striking the sow as she advanced toward him. By the time the gunshots stopped echoing down the valley, the sow had piled up only a few yards from Steve. He was shaken by the speed at which the sow closed the distance between them, but relieved that her progress was stopped by his focused and proficient use of his sidearm. Steve immediately knew that his elk hunt was over, at least for the time being. The hunters made their way back toward civilization to find a phone. They contacted the Idaho Citizens Against Poaching Group, which is an organization of Idaho citizens focused on preventing or apprehending wildlife poachers. CAP responders contacted the Idaho Fish and Game, who sent an investigative team to the attack site. They conducted a thorough investigation, utilizing the information provided by Steve as well as the forensic evidence, like bear and human tracks, shell casings, and entry wounds on the grizzly's carcass. They determined that the angle of the entry wounds verified Steve's portrayal of things, and decided that he had acted in self-defense. This is an interesting point, because they also indicated that the sow was acting in self-defense when reacting to the man's presence. During this incident, Mike and Steve were uninjured, and the sow grizzly was obviously killed. There was no source indicating that the sow was defending a cached food source, and didn't state that there were cubs present at the time. It appeared that the sow was simply reacting to a human being too close that apparently made her feel threatened. As a hunter, I go into the woods as prepared as I can for a confrontation with a hungry or aggressive predator. I think it is safe to assume that Mike and Steve did the same. If it weren't for Steve's quick reactions in defending himself, he may have been the victim of a bear attack. He may have sustained serious injuries or death at the paws, claws, and teeth of one of the world's most powerful predators. Authorities issued a statement encouraging hunters to carry bear spray, hunt in groups, watch for bear sign like tracks, scat, and digging. Hunters should remove their meat as fast as possible and hang it, as well as trash and food, at least 200 yards from their camp and at least 10 feet off the ground. They also advise that hunters make noise around creeks and streams, as the babbling of the water can drown out their approach. It seems like Steve and Mike followed these guidelines for the most part, which may have prevented a more serious and injurious attack. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think bear spray would have been effective to avoid this attack, or did it happen too fast? Do you think Steve should have waited to see if the grizzly sow was bluffing before firing his pistol? Why do you think Steve and the grizzly ended up surprising each other? Was she napping when he approached? What would you have done if you found yourself in Steve's position and were being charged by an enormous grizzly from close range? I'll be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Aspen Snowmass Ski Resort in Aspen, Colorado. This is the heart of the Rocky Mountains, and they are at their most majestic in this area. The granite peaks jet over 14,000 feet in elevation and push back the starry host on crisp fall nights. The tall forests of pine, fir, and spruce accommodate large patches of quaking aspen trees, which turn gold in autumn's jubilee. This patchwork of color and slope is the medium of Mother Nature at her most artistic. The elk, deer, and moose mosey through greenery and trim any plants like furry gardeners equipped with primitive tools. The predators here include stealthy cougars, comical coyotes, bodacious bobcats, and bedeviled black bear boars. On the evening of October 23, 2023, a security guard, whom we will refer to as Jack, was performing his perfunctory duties. On any given night, Jack may be called to confront loud hotel guests or escort unauthorized visitors from the St. Regis Aspen Resort. This job had its exciting moments, but for the most part was relatively easy. The luxury hotel had recently been closed for renovations and historically is a hub for the rich and famous frequenting the town of Aspen. It's positioned right at the base of the ski resort and draws visitors with finer tastes, with its kitchen serving delicious fare. Aspen is an interesting town nestled among the high ridge of Rocky Mountains about 100 miles west of Denver. Although the big city sprawls and bustles with towering buildings and honking horns, Aspen is quite the opposite. The mountains around the town rise inside the city limits and surround it like a crumpled emerald blanket. Unlike other blankets, this one may not bring warmth, safety, and rest, but unexpected visitors who do surprising and harmful things. On this evening, Jack was in the process of marking off his list of procedures that he performed each night. The quiet hotel was eerie and offered him the expectation of a boring and slow shift. Just after 11 p.m., Jack received a call over his radio regarding something very unusual. The static-filled voice over the radio mentioned something about a black bear being seen near the kitchen area of the restaurant. He probably thought the bear had just been seen peeking into a door and had left on its own. I imagine he thought it was a curious cub or a juvenile and could easily be driven off by a little yelling and clapping of his hands. Jack wasn't equipped with a firearm as a security officer, as his first response to a crisis would have been to call the police after investigating it himself. He wasn't equipped with bear spray, as he was working in a hotel and not a mountain meadow. As Jack warily walked toward the kitchen, he gripped the only self-defense tool he had access to, his radio. Now, if you know anything about bear attacks, the most important information is what the victim doesn't know. Jack wasn't aware that a rather large black bear, estimated to be at least 350 pounds, had been drawn to the courtyard of the hotel. The scent of food and garbage was released into the evening air by doors propped open during renovations, doors that would have normally been closed. Jack was unaware that this hungry black bear had found a way into the kitchen and had already begun wandering the hallways in search of food. Jack left the security room as soon as the bear's presence was reported. He carefully watched well ahead of him to see if he could locate the bear as he approached the kitchen. Taking the corners widely allowed him to see further down the hallways and into rooms as he examined the floor for muddy paw prints. Now this bear attack was caught on video by the hotel's closed-circuit cameras. I've posted a link to this video on my Patreon account, which is linked below. If you'd like to check it out, it's pretty interesting and actually shows what is described below. Given it is the video of the attack, it wouldn't pass YouTube guidelines, so it wasn't included as part of this video. As Jack approached a hallway, he could see the footprints of a bear on the tile floor. The prints clearly went one way down the hall, then came back along the same path. The problem was figuring out if the bear was coming or going, and just where it had ended up. Jack proceeded from a prep room into a dishwashing room and glanced around. He didn't see the bear, and probably hoped he wouldn't see it. His eyes strained to search the shadows for a dark shape, but nothing materialized. Jack walked down a small hallway to enter another room, and just as he rounded a corner, he ran face to face with a short but very stout black bear. The light from the room behind Jack illuminated the face of the bear as it dashed toward him. As the bear quickly stood to its hind legs, Jack could see a beautiful hourglass-shaped patch of white fur in the middle of its chest. His mind processed mere fractions of a second like minutes. As he watched the right paw of the bruiser reach out toward him, Jack spun away to his left and back toward the door he came through. His mind may have been working faster than time passing, but his body was still bound by the laws of physics, matter, and energy, and there was simply no way he could escape the amount of energy the matter of the bear's paws was reaching out to impart upon him. As Jack spun to flee, the bear's massive right paw was heading toward him at a much faster and more powerful pace. The paw may have been intended for Jack's head, but where it struck him was along the right side of his back. In a blindingly quick swat, the black bear imparted enough force on Jack to send him flying over 10 feet across the kitchen floor, while completely tattering his suit jacket, shirt, and undershirt. The bear's claws cut through the flesh of Jack's back, leaving 5 distinct gashes, as well as a bear paw-shaped bruise. As Jack slid on his stomach across the kitchen floor, he clearly expected to receive follow-up bites, swats, and claw gashes. He lay prone and still for a split second, waiting to determine where he needed to defend from the bear's attack. In the CCTV footage, you can see the confusion and expectation of the bear on Jack's expression. The bear stood up on its hind legs while staring toward the human who had so suddenly materialized in front of him as he rounded the kitchen corner. Then the bear glanced back into the dark room behind it and disappeared into the safety of cover and distance. Once Jack realized the bear was not going to pounce on him to continue its attack, he pushed himself back to his feet and sprinted away from the kitchen area and that black bear that had so suddenly materialized in front of him as he rounded the kitchen corner. Jack immediately pressed the button on his radio and confirmed that there was definitely a large black bear in the kitchen area. The adrenaline of the blitzkrieg bear attack had dulled the pain from the gashes of the bear's claws. It was now starting to wear off a bit, and Jack knew he would need medical attention to help stave off infection. He used his cell phone to reach out for an ambulance to take him to medical help. I could find no summary of the medical assistance or number of sutures or stitches required to close Jack's wounds. The information indicated that Jack was released the next day after an overnight stay for observation in the hospital. Typical medical treatment after a bear attack is a heavy dose of antibiotics to fend off the infections, as well as stitches to close the layers of flesh penetrated by the bear's teeth and claws. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife Agency responded to the reports of Jack's run-in with the black bear just after it had occurred around 11 p.m. Monday night. They sent out a response team to the location, and while en route, the team observed 8 black bears walking the streets of Aspen, headed toward downtown. The response team arrived at the hotel just after midnight and immediately began scouring the area in search of the bear. They had a fairly unique description of the bear based on the hourglass-shaped patch of white fur on its chest. Its short but robust build also allowed the officers to eliminate other visiting black bears from their list of potential hotel kitchen invaders. Once they located the bear that fit the description, they were equipped and ready to tranquilize the bear. The problem with doing so in this location and time was that they were undermanned. They were concerned that they may lose the bear in the darkness and not be able to remove it. They decided to wait and return the next day to try again. On Tuesday evening, the officers returned to where they last saw the bear. This time, the game officers recruited the assistance of the Aspen Police Department, as well as the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office. The search party found the bear in Connor Park, near East Hopkins Avenue. After giving the bear the once-over to make sure he fit the description, they hazed the bear into a tree. A professionally aimed dart filled with tranquilizer put the bear to sleep, and it was recovered from the tree via a ladder on an Aspen fire truck just after 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning, October 25, 2023. Colorado Parks and Wildlife determined the bear to be a nuisance bear. Typically, bears in the area are allowed 2 strikes before being euthanized, but this bear's boldness and lack of fear of human beings in their dwellings was enough for them to decide to euthanize it. The large black bear was humanely put to sleep by CPW officers, and its carcass was taken for analysis. Following this incident, CPW issued a public warning encouraging residents to be bear aware. This statement is glaringly ironic given the incident occurred within a hotel kitchen, not a mountain trail. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Given there were 8 black bears observed by officials the same night they were responding to a bear attack inside a hotel, what do you think needs to happen to make Aspen streets safer from bear attacks? How do you think this bear attack could have been avoided? In what ways could it have been worse? Can you describe a face-to-face encounter with a hungry black bear at your job? I will be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to what is quickly spiraling into a bear attack area in need of intervention. Western Montana has been featured on this channel time and time again, so this time is no surprise. Near the town of Big Sky is a trail system known as the Yellow Mule Trails. The mountains around the town tower to over 10,000 feet, with Gallatin Peak being the tallest. The steep granite mountains are crowded with expansive stands of pine, fir, and spruce trees and contain pockets of aspen interspersed here and there. Along nearly every body of water, you may find bulrush and willow cushioned by lush grasses between. It is a sportsman's paradise here, but recently it became a sportsman's nightmare. At about 1:45 p.m. on September 8, 2023, 61-year-old Rudy Norlander was up doing what he loved, hunting and being in the outdoors. Rudy is the owner of Alpine Adventures, an ATV rental company in Big Sky. He is a U.S. Navy veteran. Anyone who knew Rudy understood he was always prepared. He was a fan of the hit TV show Survivor and even tried to audition. On this day, he had his bear spray and his high-powered hunting rifle along with him. Rudy loved going to the Yellow Mule's Loop Trail, which is a circuitous route winding through prime deer habitat, but it also leads through prime grizzly territory. Rudy had a client rent some ATVs for their deer hunt, and Rudy had tagged along to hang out. The father and son had walked off a short distance, spotted a deer, and eventually worked their way within shooting distance. After firing a shot at what they thought was a lethal spot on the deer's anatomy, they went down to the location where the deer was standing when they shot. Now, conventional wisdom says that when you track a wounded game animal, you mark your position from where you shot, then proceed to the location where the game animal was wounded. From there, you look for telltale information provided in the surroundings. When a deer is struck with a bullet or an arrow, blood isn't necessarily visible right away, but you can usually see a disturbed pattern in the game animal tracks. The tracks may veer sideways or it may stumble. That may be the location where the game animal was struck by the projectile. After locating the tracks of the wounded animal, blood or tissue evidence should start appearing along the tracks if you hit the game animal in a vital area. Sure enough, the father and son found a decent blood trail indicating their shot was true. It seemed to peter out after following the blood trail for some time. They lost the track and decided to go back up to the ATVs and tell Rudy about what had happened. As soon as they reached the ATV, they told Rudy about how the blood trail had just disappeared and asked him for advice. Rudy wasn't the kind of guy to let a wounded game animal go without doing his best to locate the carcass. Together, the three of them headed back down the trail in search of the blood trail. Rudy knew this area like the back of his hand. He took a familiar trail that led him to the area the other men described and found a blood trail. It turned out that it was a different deer than the one wounded by the hunters, and there were already some very dangerous hunters following this one. In the fall, bears of all sorts are in hyperphagia, which simply means they eat as much food wherever they can find it. They are trying to pack on fat for hibernation and can roam hundreds of miles over a week's time in search of it. They will do desperate things if they have not gained the requisite fat, and have been known to be most active and aggressive during this time of year. A few hundred yards away, Rudy saw an adult grizzly. He decided he would pull his rifle out, just in case he needed to defend his and his fellow hunters' lives. Rudy holed himself up behind a tree and could see a juvenile grizzly a little way away from him. By the time he redirected his attention back to the large grizzly bear, his entire situation had turned extremely dangerous. The giant grizzly, described as being a 10-foot mega grizzly, had closed in on Rudy. He was by himself, having separated from the father and son who were looking elsewhere for the wounded deer. The giant grizzly had suddenly reappeared danger close to Rudy. It isn't clear what brought the bear within such close proximity to the man so quickly. Perhaps his scent had drifted to it on a fickle breeze, but whatever the case, it was now closing in on him with its eyes fixed directly on him. Rudy raised his rifle to his shoulder and yelled, trying to get the bear to stop its charge. As it closed in on him, he knew he had only one option, and he took aim and squeezed the trigger of his hunting rifle. Expecting a loud report and a sturdy kick as the rifle discharged, Rudy was terrified when he only heard the click of the firing pin striking the primer. His hunting rifle had misfired, and at the most crucial time of his life. In the adrenaline-filled moments of a bear attack, victims' brains reportedly process thoughts and information very quickly. Rudy's first thought was to fall down and play dead, but he knew he wouldn't even be able to dive to the ground before the bear would be on him. In a last-ditch attempt at driving the bear off, Rudy swung his fist with all his might and struck the bear in the nose. Rudy's punch bounced off of the grizzly's nose as if it didn't connect. The bear reached out its jaws and clamped them onto Rudy's face like some kind of predatory kiss of death. The single bite from the grizzly's jaws shattered Rudy's lower jaw, and with one shake of its head, his entire lower jaw was torn from his face. Along with Rudy's jaw came a portion of his trachea, which is the cartilage tube we use to breathe. The enraged grizzly began clawing at Rudy's chest cavity, slicing through bones, skin, and flesh with very little resistance. With Rudy's chest torn wide open, the grizzly moved its attack down to his right leg. It bit his leg several times, opening up huge puncture wounds from which his blood poured onto the ground around him. During the attack, Rudy's body was being tossed around like a pillow at a teenager's slumber party. The grizzly then clamped its jaws onto his left bicep and drove its 2-inch-long canines clean through his skin and muscle, opening up several more huge puncture wounds. Now, in prior episodes, we have discussed what really happens when any bear bites a human being. They don't simply clamp down until their teeth come together. They drive their canines through the flesh and use their body mass and strength to pull the flesh away. This nearly always creates a wound cavity beneath the skin that can fill with infection and at least bruise the tissue. If this were a horror movie, you would expect to see the victim lose consciousness, but Rudy stayed conscious through the entire attack. He wasn't a limp body being tossed around during the attack, but chose to fight for his life, yelling, kicking, and punching the grizzly the entire time. A short way around the mountain, the father and son had heard Rudy's screams and the bear's roars. They arrived at the attack scene while the bear was still mauling Rudy, but hesitated to fire their rifle as they didn't want to hit him. They did manage to shoot the bear one time before they grabbed rocks and began pelting the bear as they yelled, trying to run it off. For some reason, the rocks worked. The bear turned around and disappeared into the forest, for now. As they approached Rudy's side, they could see he was near death's door. They fortunately discovered they had cell service. They retrieved their cell phone and reached out to emergency responders for immediate medical attention for Rudy. While waiting for the paramedics to respond, the father and son continually asked Rudy if he was okay. He was missing so much of his face, all he could do was lift his hand and give them an affirmative thumbs up in response. Given the amount of pain and trauma Rudy had just experienced, it seems a medical miracle that he didn't pass out or at least go into shock. The hunters waited with him until they heard the unmistakable sound of the Gallatin County Life Flight helicopter entering the valley. Along with the Life Flight paramedics, the GCSS Air, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks Law Enforcement, U.S. Forest Service Law Enforcement as well, and the Gallatin County Sheriff's deputies all responded to Rudy's attack scene. Rudy's route to medical help was met with some confusion. During the attack, he had sustained a complete removal of his lower jaw, partial removal of his trachea, a collapsed lung from the bear tearing open his chest, and numerous other gashes and puncture wounds from the grizzly's claws and teeth. They knew he needed urgent life-saving medical care, but his wounds had to have approached the support limitations of every hospital in the vicinity. At the Bozeman Health Deaconess Regional Medical Center, Rudy underwent surgery to stabilize his condition. Medical professionals there performed a tracheostomy, which is an incision into the trachea to allow air to enter the trachea from an unobstructed pathway. From there, Rudy was flown to the University of Utah Hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he is currently recuperating in the intensive care unit at the time of this video creation. The most recent updates on Rudy's condition indicate that he is off the ventilator now and is doing better. He recently underwent the first of many reconstructive surgeries to repair at least part of the damage done to his face. He reportedly even walked around a bit at the hospital. His daughter indicated that plans to remove one of his fibulas from his lower leg to recreate his lower jaw eventually. For now, he will have a metal plate inserted to replace his jaw for the short term. From the time he was attacked to when he arrived at the hospital in Bozeman, Rudy had been horribly mangled but managed to stay alert and aware for 2 hours. In response to Rudy's attack, authorities have closed the area around Yellow Mule Trail System to any foot traffic and have initiated a search for the giant grizzly bear. A GoFundMe account has been opened up if you would like to help Rudy offset some of his medical bills, and it is linked to in a pinned comment below this video. A few of Rudy's photos have been posted on my Patreon linked below, so if you want to check them out, they are available. If this were the end of this episode, it would be plenty, but I have some more information on a follow-up regarding the episode about Amy Adams's fatal grizzly attack on July 22nd, just about 50 miles south of Rudy's. Just west of West Yellowstone, a sow and cub grizzly had been breaking into cabins and homes in search of food. She had entered through windows and devoured dog food and any other food items she could find. The sow had a single cub that would accompany her during her home invasions. The sow and cub were apprehended after complaints were filed by the residents in the area. DNA evidence was pulled from both grizzlies and compared to the DNA evidence pulled from the scene of Amy's attack. The samples were compared favorably. The same sow was also found to have attacked a man in Idaho 3 years ago near Henry's Lake. Both grizzlies were positively identified as the bears who killed Amy Adamson and were immediately euthanized. In the last month, at least 4 close encounters have been reported to authorities by outdoorsmen. All of the encounters in which the bears were killed were deemed self-defense and the victims were not cited for any violations. Dan Springer, Gallatin County Sheriff's deputy, encourages people who decide to venture into the forests to plan for contingencies. A cell phone that worked and received a signal was integral to saving Rudy's life in this episode, and many other instances of similar occurrences have also been documented. First aid and trauma kits are essential as well. The Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks issued a statement declaring that Montana is bear country. They state that grizzly populations are increasing in density and are becoming more widespread. The likelihood of people encountering grizzlies will increase in occurrence and frequency. Wow, what an episode. After reviewing the facts surrounding this attack, I am left with a few questions for you. What would you do if you found yourself between 2 different grizzly bears while tracking a wounded deer? Do you plan to put a cell phone into your backpack next time you venture into the forest? What other defensive tools do you recommend for a person to use to defend themselves in addition to bear spray and a high-powered rifle? What factors can you identify that led to Rudy's survival? I will be glad to read and respond to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to familiar territory, the eastern slope of the Canadian Rocky Mountains in south-central Alberta, Canada. The area around Wyperus is perhaps the world's current hotbed for grizzly bear attacks. The rolling hills of the Canadian Rocky Mountain foothills invite outdoor enthusiasts of varied interests. Hunters, hikers, campers, loggers, fishermen, and other adventurers are seeking the beauty, resources, and freedom more now than ever before. The forests here are packed with pine, fir, spruce, and aspen trees interrupted by stands of willows and berry bushes along the water sources in the area. Common animals in this area include deer, elk, and moose, and you might even see sheep and goats on the higher peaks to the west. The dominant predators in the area include coyotes, wolves, cougars, black bears, and grizzly bears. It seems that the grizzly bears here are the predatory species that are increasing in their confrontations with human beings. In many of the locations we discuss on this channel, a shortage of food is often a contributing factor to bear attacks, but in this episode, it is actually an abundance of food that does so. On the afternoon of July 19, 2016, 25-year-old Laura Hayworth and her husband James were enjoying sunbathing at Trapper's Campground positioned along the Ghost River. I know what you are thinking. Why do so many of these attacks happen in places with creepy or strange names? In some of the locations of the bear attacks we discuss, the appearance of a mountain shaped like a bear tooth, or named after something with a malevolent sound could be a coincidence, but maybe not. James and Laura had put some thought into their camping trip, at least enough to bring bear spray along with them. They had even practiced dispensing it just in case they may need to. As James and Laura basked in the sunshine just above an embankment along the river, she noticed a rustling in the bushes just a few meters behind them. Laura glanced over and saw something grayish, brown in color moving among the bushes and assumed it was wolves. She stood to her feet and told James to get up. She informed him that she thinks she sees a couple of wolves. James stood to his feet just in time to get a brief glimpse of 2 grizzly bear cubs. As soon as he did so, his vision was filled with the shape of the biggest grizzly bear he had ever seen, emerging quickly from the bushes only 8 feet from him and his wife. As the bear thundered toward the couple, she let out a roar that shook their bones. She growled and roared as she came at them in fear they were a threat to her cubs. The bear closed in on them so quickly that James had no time to react. Both James and Laura fumbled with the safety cap on their bear spray, but it appeared to be jammed. The bear had bore down on them so quickly that they had no time to properly dispense the spray. At a distance of only a few feet, even if they had managed to operate the bear spray correctly, it would not have been able to disseminate the cloud of irritant in an effective manner. The only thing they could have hoped for was a direct shot in her eyes and nose, but they were not able to complete that. Terror filled James as the attack scene from the movie The Revenant flashed through his mind. He thought he was dead, no doubt about it. He knew there was no way he could avoid her. She bowled him over and took him to the ground. Her immense size and weight forced the reality of the futility of resistance into James's mind. James scrambled back to his feet and started yelling at the bear. She returned to him and knocked him down once again. The sow was running back and forth between him and Laura, briefly confused about who posed a greater danger. James' brain was thinking very quickly, trying to process how to handle and escape from the danger posed by the enraged sow. He quickly told Laura to jump into the river, and he began running toward its banks himself. Just as James reached the river shore, he felt the enormous impact of the sow tackling him from behind. The sow had slammed him down onto the edge of the river and was standing over him with her front paws on the back of his thighs. The only thought racing through James's mind was that he was a dead man. This sow had knocked him down and sent him flying through the air, crashing onto the rocks 3 times now in a matter of a few seconds. She was now holding him under water, which would cause him to drown in a matter of a minute or so. This was clearly not a sow looking only to make sure her cubs were safe, but one that wanted to exterminate any threat to them. Whenever bears attack a prey animal in the water, they are frequently witnessed pulling it into deeper water by the neck or back. Then they climb onto it and force its nose or head underwater, utilizing the water to drown their prey. James was now feeling the same urgency as so many moose, deer, or elk may have experienced from a bear attack in water. Suddenly he felt the sow's weight shift and get off of his thighs. He emerged from the water to see the sow now chasing after Laura. Laura was smaller than James, and the bear knocked her down with just as much force. Laura lifted her hands to her face as she screamed in terror, hoping to ward off the bear's jaws from crushing her skull. James again scrambled back to his feet and sprinted toward the bear and his wife. He watched as the bear stood over Laura's outstretched hands as the bear clamped down on Laura's wrist. It began to dash toward the bushes with Laura bouncing along the ground, in tow. As James gained ground on the bear, dragging his wife, the bear glanced over and saw him. It immediately let go of Laura's wrist and disappeared into the bushes to find her cubs. At this point, James wasn't sure what damage had been done during the lightning-fast bear attack to himself, nor his wife. He ran over to Laura's side and dragged her away from the edge of the bushes. He had hoped the bear would realize the distance between them was safe enough to gather her cubs and flee the area. As James looked up the slope, searching for the bears, he could see the sow and cubs scampering up the hillside. The couple discussed how they could get out of the area without causing another altercation with the sow and cubs. They began making their way along the river shore to a clearer location with bushes. They made noise and yelled as they went, so the sow would know where they were. A little way down the valley, a ranch hand at the Lazy H Ranch, Coleman Blair was helping bring in some hay. He heard the commotion from the attack and looked upstream to see James emerging from the river and Laura underneath the bear as it chewed on her. He usually carried his rifle whenever he went to work, but for some reason he left it at home on this day. By the time he arrived at James and Laura's location, the bear had made its way across the river and was emerging on the opposite bank. In a matter of minutes, James and Laura heard a man's voice yelling in reply to their cries for help. Up at the top of the cliff, they could see two men, one with a red shirt and the other with a dark shirt. James and Laura yelled, "Help! Help!" and told them there was a bear nearby. The two men indicated they knew of the bear and could see that it had departed the immediate area. James and Laura could see one of the men scrambling down the cliff toward them as the other stood watch from above to keep an eye on the sow's location. Blair ran down a large embankment towards the scene. The bear had moved away to the other side of the river by the time he reached James and his wife. He could see Laura's wrist was clearly broken due to its misshapen appearance. She had several deep bite wounds, scrapes, and cuts from being dragged across the rocky ground. James didn't have any bite wounds but was scraped and bruised from the encounter. He also had an indelible bear paw-shaped bruise on his hamstring from where the sow stood on top of him at the riverbank. Blair stated later that when you see someone getting chewed on by a grizzly, you really can't just stand around. Due to his response, a follow-up attack by the sow may have been avoided. As soon as Blair had reached the couple's location, the three of them began making their way back up the steep embankment. He stated later that Laura was very shaken up by the experience and was chewed up pretty badly. As soon as they had reached the top, James dashed off to fetch the vehicle and rush his wife to get medical attention. He jumped into the vehicle and peeled out toward his wife, sending dirt flying as he went. Blair helped load Laura into the vehicle, and she and James quickly disappeared back down the road in a cloud of dust. A short distance down the dirt road, an ambulance pulled into view. The couple skidded to a stop, and the paramedics went to work on Laura. They began to assess her injuries and bandage them according to severity. They also radioed in for a medical helicopter team to respond for urgent care for Laura. The helicopter arrived at their location a short while later. The entire time the paramedics worked on Laura, she pled for them to tend to her husband, worried that he was also injured by the angry sow. They loaded Laura into the helicopter and flew her to the nearest hospital while James drove himself there in their vehicle. Later, James stated that people need to understand that animals must be respected. He continued to acknowledge that if the sow had wanted to tear them limb from limb, she would have done so. He accepted her behavior as her way of saying, "These are my cubs, get away," and is grateful that the outcome wasn't worse. An inspector with the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Branch indicated that bear attacks in the Waiparous area aren't that rare anymore. He stated that they have seen a half-dozen bear attacks within the last few years. The attacks have ranged from bluff charges to painful bites to serious maulings. Authorities took clothing from James and Laura to try to pull DNA from the sow's slobber that may have been present on the clothes. They plan to analyze it in an attempt to link the sow with any future problems they may have with her. When it comes to a sow defending her cubs, authorities are always cautious in reacting with lethal force. They stated that grizzlies play an integral part of the ecosystem, and removing one has ripple effects on many other animals and plants in the area. They also plan to close the area for a lengthy amount of time to allow the sow and her cubs to make their way through it. Biologists indicated that this year's wild berry yield in the Waiparous area was a bumper crop compared to adjacent ecosystems. The plentiful food source brought grizzlies from miles around to the location to feast on the sugary, nutritious delicacies to help them gain weight needed for hibernation. This food source is particularly important to sows and cubs, given there is no annual reliable salmon runs around there. After reviewing the details of this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think the attack was a territorial attack or a defensive one? Could this attack have been avoided if James and Laura hadn't stood to investigate the rustling in the bushes near them? Would a firearm have changed the outcome of this attack, or did it happen far too fast? Would you expect to be attacked by a protective sow when you are sunbathing on a river embankment? As an added challenge, let's see who can list the most contributing factors that led to Laura's survival. I will be glad.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to the small town of Grand Isle, about 325 kilometers northwest of Prince George. It is in central British Columbia, Canada, along Babine Lake, and is one of the best locations in the world to view grizzly bears during the sockeye salmon runs from August to October each year. The Fulton River project near Grand Isle is a man-made salmon spawning bed, with the first channel being constructed in 1965 and the second in 1971. These channels are about 5 miles long and allow sockeye fry to take advantage of the ideal rearing potential in upstream Babine Lake. Annually, these channels have the capacity to produce 135,000 adult salmon, as well as provide jobs to area residents. About 2,000 people visit the channels each year to watch the grizzly bears fight for prime salmon fishing locations and gather the calories they need for survival. When the grizzlies show up here, they take part in a massive cycle of nutrients that originates here and extends into the Pacific Ocean, where the majority of the salmon life cycle occurs. The fry and smolt spend the first 3 years of their life in the confines of fresh water before making their way downstream to the ocean. While feeding in the ocean, sockeye salmon can grow up to about 2.5 feet in length and up to around 15 pounds. After 2 years in the ocean, they are approaching the end of their life cycle, which culminates in them making their way up the exact same watersheds from which they came, and frequently returning to the same gravel beds from which they hatched to breed the next generation. Bears, wolves, and other animals help circulate the nutrients to the areas surrounding the streams by carrying the salmon carcasses into the brush, thereby fertilizing the plants there. Any disruption in this 5-year cycle in the important source of protein, fat, and nutrients that bears need can disrupt or stress grizzly populations. As far as nutrients that grizzlies get from salmon, here is a quick breakdown. They typically prefer the brain and roe, which are the eggs, as well as the skin of salmon. Each tablespoon of roe offers bears or any consumer about 2 grams of protein and 1 gram of carbohydrates. Each female salmon produces between 600 to 800 eggs per pound of body weight. That means a single female salmon, called a hen, weighing 10 pounds can produce between 6,000 to 8,000 eggs for her reproductive life cycle. The skin and brain of the salmon offer important sources of fats and vitamins as well, but the roe is the bear's big payoff when it comes to salmon. The geography around Grand Isle is mountainous, with valleys lined by dense stands of pine, fir, and spruce trees, with a thick forest floor of alder, willows, and berry bushes. Mule deer, elk, bison, and moose are common forest dwellers you may see in this area. Predators here include coyotes, mountain lions, wolves, black bears, and grizzly bears. Each of these predators balances on an ecological food system which overlaps in part with each other. At around 7 a.m. on September 29, 2021, a 70-year-old photographer, whom we will call Jack, was vying for position to take pictures of the grizzlies as they fished for salmon. Getting a good photograph of a grizzly while it is fishing is an amazing and captivating pursuit that can lead to an image representing 2 successful recovery stories. Both salmon and grizzlies have been protected and growing since preservation efforts started around the middle of the last century. As Jack walked down an access road that went along the Fulton River project, he searched for a perch to observe the bears. This project diverts water from the adjacent Fulton River and directs it along a winding series of engineered gravel breeding areas called redds. All along the river, grizzlies gather to compete to catch the salmon as they migrate toward the redds to finish their life cycle. Grizzlies do not normally tolerate close proximity with each other or humans, but due to the abundance of food here, they can be found in high numbers. They are so focused on finding and defending their location to catch fish that photographers and onlookers will frequently find themselves within a few yards of bears without much threat. This creates an illusory atmosphere in many human visitors' minds. They sometimes slip into a relaxed mindset, believing the bears to disregard human presence. The dense undergrowth along the Fulton River provides very good cover for any animal there. The grizzlies navigate the area on a bear-established trail system which weaves its way along the banks and periodically emerges onto human trails and roads.
As Jack walked along the access road with his camera and gear in hand, he approached one of these junctions at a very inopportune time.
Unbeknownst to Jack, a grizzly was just leaving the riverside along a trail and converging on his travel route. Surprising a bear, even one with a belly full of salmon roe, is never a good idea. As soon as the bear saw the man within just a few yards of itself, its fight or flight reaction took over, and the fight reaction of a bear is always dangerous to a human. If you surprise me, you might just get punched in the nose, but a bear doesn't have fists, so you can imagine the equivalent reaction. The bear blitzed the man in a blur of brownish fur and roaring teeth. Jack held out his arm as a means to maintain separation between his body and the angry bear. In an attack that lasted only a few seconds, the grizzly clamped its jaws onto Jack's arm and tossed its head back and forth, tearing holes the size of quarters into his forearm and upper arm. The attack consisted of several bites in rapid succession before the bear dashed off into the bush. I may be dating myself by saying this, but some grizzlies are slightly smaller than a Volkswagen Bug from the 1960s, and you may be dating yourself by understanding my meaning. Most people think an animal the size of a small vehicle would be easy to spot and avoid, but even a large bear can move with amazing speed. Before Jack could process the events that transpired, the bear was gone, and he was lying on his back along the access road. It wasn't but a few minutes before other photographers and visitors in the area arrived at Jack's side after hearing him yelling during the attack. They could see the enormous holes in his arm gashed by the bear's teeth and comforted him while calling for medical assistance. Jack was loaded up and flown to a hospital in Prince George, a little more than 150 miles away. Once there, his condition was stabilized, and his wounds were sutured closed. His injuries were not life-threatening, but were imparted in such a rapid manner that a prolonged attack may have threatened his life, or may have cost him his arm. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the nearby town of Houston were sent out to respond to Jack's grizzly attack. They worked in conjunction with the Conservation Officer Service in the investigation. Given that the bear and Jack met along a brush-covered roadside, the investigators deemed the attack as a strictly defensive attack and decided that no further action would be taken against the grizzly. It was decided the bear was not acting as a nuisance to humans and would not be killed or relocated. The Conservation Officer Services issued warnings to visitors about surprising bears and encouraged the public to take precautions against it. Packing bear spray and making a lot of noise may prevent confrontations and attack when traveling through bear country. They encourage people to stay aware of their surroundings and travel in groups as much as possible. Conservation officers here have received an average of 138 calls each month in BC in the month of September each year. Only 32 of those calls required a response by an officer. Over this time frame, only 3 grizzlies have had to be killed due to danger or nuisance to humans. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I have a few questions for you. Do you think it is wise to reintroduce grizzlies into their former habitat in areas without re-establishing salmon runs which helps them survive? How do you think Jack may have avoided this attack? Do you think bear spray would have prevented this attack? Would you feel safe walking along an access road near a river lined with giant, hungry grizzly bears? Do you run away or punch at people when they jump scare you? I will be happy to read and reply to your thoughts, so post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.